Now, without further ado, it's my pleasure to invite Margaritis Schinas, please, to join me on stage for the next conversation. Hello, welcome. So welcome, and I think this conversation is particularly well timed because the work of the Commission has just got started. So I think that's really where I would like to start with you, is what can we expect from the van der Leyen Commission, and how will it differ from its predecessor, do you think?
Well, I think that each European political cycle is marked by an overarching objective, by a central theme. I have lived through the era of integration, where we were building the common currency, where we were completing the enlargement. Then another political cycle where the Juncker years, that one could call the years of the polycrisis, where the EU was struck by a number of successive, intense, and largely difficult to predict crises, on which more or less we managed to cope. And now, this beginning of the new political cycle in Europe, I think there is one term that comes out very strongly. I would say that this is the Commission that would have to prepare the transition. This will be the Commission of the transition. Transition to green Europe. You mentioned the sustainability theme. Transition to a digital Europe, where our main job would be to come out very quickly with a framework for artificial intelligence that would allow Europe to lead, shape, frame changes that will be of cataclysmic nature. And I would say the third transition is a societal transition, the transition towards what I like to call resilient and cohesive societies that are able to, at the same time, protect Europeans, but also empower them, open up opportunities, mobility opportunities, education opportunities, new skills, new experiences. I think the van der Leyen Commission would be recalled as the Commission that was called to prepare Europe's transition to tomorrow.
And in terms of what you detect from its sort of first weeks in action, what sort of dynamic can we expect from it?
I think one should reasonably expect a very good traction and dynamic on the three transitions that I just mentioned, that largely depend on what the Commission knows to do well, which is initiate policy, propose legislation, frame the regulatory environment. But as events proved, the main risk for this Commission would be the broader geopolitical environment, the risks around us. Some of them you just mentioned, and Federica Mogherini, whose presence I would like to salute here in Athens tonight. Later tonight, will give you her take as the chief practitioner of EU foreign and security policy for the last 5 years. I think now more free in her current status, she would be able to share with you Europe's fears, risks, but also opportunities on foreign policy.
So just in this sort of transition that you talk about, what are there some initiatives or some, because as you say, the Commission has the right of initiative or the responsibility of initiative in the European framework. What can we expect to be the new policies that we will see first and foremost? You mentioned the AI area, digital area, but what else?
In last December, 11th of December, the Commission already in one of our first meetings put forward the policy framework for what is now widely known as the Green Deal, which is the roadmap that would make Europe the first decarbonized continent on the planet. This is the new big idea, the new frontier, where Europe will lead. Shortly after that, now in January, we came forward with the transition fund, the third transition fund, which is a very sophisticated fund and mechanism that could leverage money that would allow for a more general wave of green investments, especially in the areas that would be more touched by the transition. Artificial intelligence, the EU framework for artificial intelligence will come, I would say, later this year, around summer. And in spring, you should expect the EU pact, the new EU pact for asylum and migration, which is my territory.
I'll come on to that in a minute, but just first, I'm curious. I talked a little bit earlier about, and I think this is something that's perhaps on everybody's mind, the question of whether this talk of carbon-free continents is real or whether it's talk. So what can you say that the Commission can do for its part to make this something that is actually a real agenda and not a rhetorical agenda?
The transition to a green Europe is happening already. Actually, I think that in many areas, reality, the markets, are even faster than the policymakers. Okay, we're setting the tone for the decarbonization and zero emissions by 2050. But if you talk to people involved in the financial sector, I see many of them here present, they would already tell you that greening investment policies and greening the portfolios of companies is something that is happening already. Our own, the European Investment Bank, very recently decided not to finance any more projects on fossil energy. So it is happening.
But the problem with, this 2050 as a target, I personally, I like thinking about 2050, but if you're a politician setting a target for 2050, this is a target when you know you're not going to be in office and accountable for whether it's been met or not. So actually it's a good aspiration, but you want to see concrete steps along the way. So what can you give us a sense of what the actual substance of this green agenda from the Commission's end would be?
First, let me share a secret with you. All the big ideas that the EU set in terms of flagship initiative and flagship dates happened. The Treaty of Rome, setting up a vision of a common European market, was signed on the 25th of March, 1957. The single market came into effect the 1st of January, 1993. But it did come. And now is the biggest market on earth, the biggest and better regulated market of 500 million consumers. So I would like to be very clear that by 2050, Europe will be decarbonized. Probably faster than we think, especially if the younger generations continue to pile pressure to policymakers. Now, on what is the essence of the project? I would say it's a two-track, project of two tracks. First is a very steady program of reduction of emissions. We already have intermediate targets, as you probably know, for 2030 that we will revise to become more stricter, more ambitious. And then the end result would be 2050. So this is the emission track. And the parallel track would be the greening of investments that would also entail not only the transition fund, but also the greening of financial services, new products. So there is a new dynamic. It's happening already. And again, my personal guess is that the market on this one, market and society will go faster than policy making.
Let's turn to your own portfolio now. There was some controversy over the name, and it changed its name on the way from protecting to promoting the European way of life. It's also a very broad portfolio. Can you try to explain in a nutshell what this vast territory that you have is actually going to mean?
Well, let me first start with the controversy. This was a typical, I would say, a schizophrenic and self-flagellating Brussels bubble debate. The fact that we Europeans still like to argue on what we represent at the same time that the whole world sees Europe as a success story, as a beacon of light in a world that is coming darker and darker, that says a lot about our way of seeing ourselves in a very critical and often self-flagellating way. I think the root of the misunderstanding was that certain parts of the political spectrum tried to interpret this title of promotion of European way of life as us against the others narrative, like a bulldozer model of society that would impose our way of thinking to the rest of the world, or the people who are not like us. Whereas I explained from the first moment, also in the Parliament, that I see the European way of life as a mirror that reflects the diversity, the richness, our cultural specificities. What makes us European today, what makes us strong, is not the fact that there is a homos europaeus. There is not a homos europaeus. There is not one single model, but all of us together, we represent what Europe stands for. And in terms of content, of policy content, I think in this very extensive brief of the Vice Presidency, there is a cluster of policies that pertain to the Europe that protects, which is mainly internal security and migration, and another family of policies that pertains to the Europe that empowers, that brings mobility, skills, education, culture, youth, and public health.
So if there was something which you would most hope to achieve during your mandate, what would it be?
Am I allowed to say two things?
Yes. You could say three if you wanted
no,
to.
I would
two
like,
is better.
I would like to say two. One from the Europe that protects side, by any means of comparison, I think our final, central, and one of the most emblematic priorities of this Commission is the EU Asylum and Migration Pact. That means to bring in a systemic improvement to the way Europe adapts our asylum laws so that there is a generalized burden sharing of all the asylum pressures not left.
So what will be the main thrust of that?
A system of responsibility and solidarity that would entail a better management of our external borders, and at the same time a burden-sharing mechanism that would allow asylum requests to be processed not at the countries of the first entry, as is the case now, but amongst the 27.
And your confidence that that could be reached at 27? It's been controversial, as we all know.
I'm more optimistic than in 2016 when we tried it again and we failed, because there is a certain change in the overall political atmospherics in the European Union. There is more willingness in certain capitals. There is more understanding in Northern and Eastern Europe. And yes, I'm more confident.
Okay.
And on the other side, of the empowerment side, I think what I would like to achieve is a radical overhaul of the tools that we have at our disposals to do better on skills. Europe needs a skills revolution for a job market that will be substantially different from the one we know now. And this skills revolution is urgent. It will not only have to do with people that are already in the job market and they need upskilling, but that would be a revolution that would have to touch everybody in society. No one should be left behind. The changes will be very fast, very profound. In a way, it's if you look around, one looks around, you see that many key sectors of the economy were looking for new skills that Europe cannot provide at this stage. So this will be my other ambition.
And there is this other aspect of your brief, which you mentioned, the security union. What does that mean exactly?
This is an attempt that was initiated, by the way, by the last British commissioner, the Commission, Sir Julian King, who pulled together a series of initiatives that we call Security Union, which is a meaningful contribution to pool at EU level response to threats, security threats that are new to our system and that need to be dealt with at European level. You have seen the day that the new Austrian government was sworn in, her computer system was crashed. You saw yesterday that here in Greece, main ministries were also the target of cyber attack. This is part, we think, of a new wave of threats, state-sponsored. These are not individuals. We need to prepare our defenses. We need to identify threats, and we already have or building defenses at the European level for networks, information systems. We have an EU agency, which is based in Greece, by the way, ENISA. So we're pulling all our efforts to try to make Europe defend effectively against these threats.
So as we've discussed, you have this vast territory under your brief, the Vice Presidency. When you wake up in the morning, what do you decide to focus on, or how do you decide to prioritize between you?
Well, just to be fair, it's not just me. For each of these portfolio areas, there is a portfolio commissioner, and I have the responsibility of steering and coordinating a project group of commissioners. So we have actually, it works rather well because commissioners work with what we call directorates general, where the thematic policy DGs, whereas we vice presidents have a dedicated team of the Secretariat General, which is the equivalent of the cabinet office, I would say, the commission. So it works rather well because we have these work streams clearly defined, and I never try to mingle the day with different things. We have dedicated work streams, and yes, it works very well. I'm very happy with my commissioners and my services.
Okay, well, good luck with it all. I want to, before I let you go, I want to put you in the hot seat, and as I'm going to do with everybody, and ask for your prediction for 2020.
I'm confident that 2020 would be a year where the economy will continue to deliver. I think that on the regulatory side that we've been discussing, things would go rather well. But I'm relatively worried on the broader geopolitical context. Europe's neighborhood is not safer today as it was a few years ago. And this is a risk factor, I think, a factor that we need to take into account very seriously.
Anywhere in particular that's on your risk radar that you worry about?
Yes, I'm more worried about Libya than Syria, if I may put it this way.
Okay, well, we might pick up that theme with Federica Mogherini afterwards. But thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Commissioner, for talking to us. Thank you.